One late summer day in 1945, a battered steamship sailed from the port of Marseille. It was the Marder, the first ship to carry Shoah survivors to Palestine since the end of the war. It carried 173 orphaned Jewish children, survivors of the Buchenwald concentration camp, including 8-year-old Israel Lau, a future chief rabbi of the State of Israel. Also on board were adult survivors of the camps. Among them, Haskell Tidor, age 42, who had been imprisoned first in Buchenwald and then in Auschwitz and had lost his entire family. As a forced laborer in Auschwitz, Haskell was put to work hauling bags of cement, leaving him disabled. Then, because he was an older man, he was given the job of assigning prisoners to work. By assigning the names of the dead to some work details, he was able to let others rest in sickbay and save hundreds of lives. On Rosh Hashana, 1944, Haskell arranged for a group of religious Jews to be sent on a distant work assignment, knowing that this would allow them to form a minyan in safety and to conduct a brief prayer service. When they returned at the end of the day, one prisoner confided to Haskell that the group had a shofar and that the shofar had been sounded. A few months later, in January 1945, as the Russian army advanced, the Germans began dynamiting Auschwitz and emptying the camp. Haskell and 60,000 others were to be sent on a grueling 30-mile march to another camp. The night before they left, another prisoner came to Haskell and handed him an object wrapped in rags. The man said, "I'm going to die on this march. If you live, take this shofar. Tell them that we blew the shofar at Auschwitz." Haskell did live. He survived the march and returned to Buchenwald, where he was liberated by the American Army on April 11, 1945. 5 months later, he was aboard the Marder as it neared the coast of Palestine. He stood on the crowded deck, surrounded by others who had lived to see this day, some of them still wearing the striped uniform of the camps. On Sunday, September 9th, the ship arrived at the port of Haifa. It was the second day of Rosh Hashana, and Haskell blew the shofar. 79 years have passed since that day, and the sound of that shofar still reverberates in our hearts. What does it mean that a shofar was sounded at Auschwitz? It seems almost unbelievable that such a thing could happen. How could a shofar be smuggled in? How could it be hidden? How could those who blew the shofar escape punishment? Yet scholars report several credible eyewitness accounts of shofars being sounded in concentration camps. We marvel today at these unfathomable acts of faith in which starving, exhausted Jewish prisoners took such risks in order to practice their religion. Haskell's daughter, Holocaust historian Judith Tidor Schwartz, says, "One thing I know from all of the thousands of survivors I've interviewed is that the impossible was possible, both the bad and the good. Impossible evil, impossible acts of Jewish affirmation. Millions were murdered and a shofar was blown. I ask myself, what did it take in order to blow the shofar in Auschwitz in 1944? First, it took some koach, physical strength. As anyone who has served as Baal Tekiah knows, getting sound out of a ram's horn isn't easy. Bringing forth that blast is an act of focused, disciplined power. Second, it took strength of heart and spirit, what we call in Hebrew ometz lev, moral courage. They believed that sounding the shofar and hearing the shofar mattered, so much so that they put their lives at risk. And what did it take for Haskell to sound the shofar in September 1945, approaching the port of Haifa? That required two other kinds of strength: givurah, heroic resilience and persistence, and tikva, inexhaustible wellsprings of hope. In Israel, and here in America too, we are sorely in need of such strength today. The past year has taken a devastating toll on so many of us in so many dimensions, and we are bruised and battered by incalculable losses. So many precious, irreplaceable lives destroyed by violence, so much suffering and trauma, so much hatred and anger assaulting our souls. So many things we once thought were true, so much that we trusted, now cast into doubt. Truth itself under attack. Our fundamental sense of safety now deeply shaken. And our places of refuge, where we once sought comfort and community, now riven by tension. Coming in the wake of the difficult years of the pandemic, it all feels overwhelming. In Israel, and here in America too, we are a community exhausted and in pain. On this holy day, the Torah gives us a story about being tested. It's Avraham, the first Jew, who faces the test, a test that may well destroy him and threatens to destroy his future. And though Avraham's test is imposed on him by God, we need not view this story in theological terms. Sometimes a test is imposed by the circumstances, the time and place in which we live. Coming to us from distant antiquity, this story of the Akedah continues to speak to us, to horrify us, and to haunt us, because in every generation, the descendants of Avraham have been tested. And now it is our turn. We who are alive today are being tested in a way that is new for our generation, tested in a way that few of us have experienced before. To face the challenges of our time, we need to call on the strength of those who came before us. First is the test of koach, physical power. We diaspora Jews tend to distrust this kind of strength, and we're sometimes uncomfortable seeing Jews wield power, for so often we have been the victims of our enemy's brute force. But koach is neither good nor bad. It is morally neutral. Its value depends on how it is used. Some level of koach, physical power, is necessary for Jewish survival. The Holocaust taught us that lesson. It showed us the unspeakable horrors wreaked on Jews who were absolutely vulnerable without the protection of any law, government, or army. Koach, physical power, is necessary to safeguard life in the Jewish state. It's required for Israelis to live safely in their homes, a basic right they share with all human beings. The Hezbollah rockets fired at northern Israel, more than 8,000 in the last 11 months. And the massive salvo of Iranian ballistic missiles launched at central and southern Israel makes us ever more grateful for Israel's air defense system. Koach is necessary for us in America as well. Sadly, there are people who hate us and want to harm us. So we need robust Jewish institutions. We need good security systems. We need fair laws, well enforced to protect Jewish lives and communities. Our tradition urges us in the words of Deuteronomy, Rak hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha ma'od. Take utmost care and watch yourselves scrupulously. This mitzvah becomes the halachic basis for not endangering one's own life. We're obligated to protect ourselves as best we can. But Jewish strength is not confined to koach, physical power. Just as important is ometz lev, courage, literally strength of heart and mind. This is the sort of strength that's needed to face assaults that are emotional, spiritual, moral, and intellectual. There's a midrash about Avraham, who is called in the Torah Avraham HaIvri, Abraham the Hebrew. The word for Hebrew, Ivri, says the midrash, comes from the word ever, meaning side, perhaps because Avraham came from the other side of the Euphrates. But one sage said it describes Avraham's willingness to stand apart from his surrounding culture and put his faith in one God. All the world was on one side, and he was on the other side. The Midrash means this as a statement of praise. Avraham was not afraid to take a different path from those around him. But it can be hard to be an Am Levad Lishkon, a people that dwells apart, alone. This is not a new feeling for Israelis, but for us in America, something has changed. It didn't begin with October 7th, but since that terrible day, our sense of discomfort and isolation has intensified. Not all Jews feel it, and not all Jews feel it in the same way. But many of us have gotten a bitter taste of what it feels like to be an Ivri, to be other, to stand apart, to feel alone. Anti-Semitism floods the internet. It rears its ugly head on campus, on the streets, in newspapers, and in the halls of Congress. For Jewish students and their parents and grandparents, for Jews in many professions who feel themselves surrounded by indifference and outright hostility, for those of us surprised and disappointed by silence when we expected friendship and support, for all of us who have to think twice about whether we can openly display our Jewish identity, this has been a painful time of reckoning. Of course, it's important to remember that American Jews have no monopoly on tzuras. In this country today, as one of my colleagues wrote, it's hard to be black or brown or Asian. It's hard to be gay or trans. It's hard to be old. It's hard to be a woman. It's hard to be disabled. And while anti-Semitism must be recognized as a distinct phenomenon, just as other hatreds must, certainly many hatreds do intersect with hatred of Jews. The Pittsburgh shooter's online post targeted refugees too. The Poway synagogue shooter's manifesto demonized Muslims. In August 2023, a gun decorated with a swastika murdered 3 black residents of Jacksonville. When it comes to white supremacists, all minorities lie in their crosshairs. So we are far from alone in having a hard time. But the fact remains that for most American Jews, there has been a shattering change in our perception of our place here, and a sense of growing uncertainty about the future that we and our children will face. In March 2024, Franklin Foer proclaimed in a cover story in The Atlantic, "The golden age of American Jews is ending." He argued that anti-Semitism on the right and the left threatens to end a long and unprecedented period of prosperity and safety for American Jews. It's no wonder that many of us are anxious, upset, and sometimes afraid. In such a time, we are in dire need of ometz lev, moral courage, emotional and spiritual fortitude. As Jews before us have learned, we are learning to stand up to hatred, even as we seek friends and allies wherever we can. We're learning that we can't let others define us. Each of us must decide for ourselves what it means to us to be Jewish, what values and principles we affirm, what Israel means to us, and what risks we're willing to take. Once, if we wanted to, we could take our Jewish identity for granted. No more. Now it is an act of courage to know who we are, to speak our truth, and to show where we stand. There's an intellectual dimension to this kind of courage, too, because we need to withstand the daily barrage of misinformation and lies that come our way, to keep learning, to patiently search for the facts, and persist in telling the truth again and again in whatever ways we can. It takes courage to be a voice for sanity and fairness when those around us veer into extremism and hysteria. It takes courage to resist simplistic solutions to exceedingly complex problems. It takes courage to form thoughtful judgments when others rush to judgment, taking refuge in slogans and stereotypes. We need ometz lev to stand up to the challenges we face today. We can't afford to collapse in exhaustion or give in to panic. We can't allow the hostility directed at us to damage our Jewish hearts and souls. More than ever before in our lifetimes, we're called to stand firm and be courageous. There is a third kind of strength being tested today. It is gevurah, a Hebrew word that I'm translating as heroism. But it's the heroism of a very specific kind. In the Tanakh, a gibor is a military hero. But our sages transformed the meaning of gevurah in striking ways. Ben Zoma asks in Mishnah Avot, Ezahu gibor, who is a hero? And he answers, Hakovesh et Yitzro, those who control their passions, who subdue their evil impulses. This Mishnah locates heroism not on the battlefield, but in the inner battle, the difficult struggle for self-control, a supreme effort to avoid getting to our worst impulses. Even more striking is a statement in the commentary Avot to Rabbi Natan. Who is a gibor? One who turns an enemy into a friend. Our sages had no illusions about how very challenging this effort can be. Its very difficulty is what makes it heroic. Consider also the prayer our sages created that is called Givurot, describing the heroic deeds of God. Ata gibor leolam Adonai, you are a gibor forever, Adonai. And how is God's givurah displayed? A surprising list follows. God sustains us with loving kindness, gives life to the dead, supports those who have fallen, heals the sick, frees the captive, remains loyal to those who sleep in the dust. It is a strength that shows itself in gentleness and care, a moral might that manifests itself in concern for the weak, support for the vulnerable, a reverence for life. It is the strength of unceasing effort and quiet persistence. Our sages developed this notion of gevurah in a time when Jews did not possess political sovereignty or military power. Indeed, it was dangerous for Jews to rebel against the authorities. It made sense for Jews who were vulnerable, especially those in the diaspora, to celebrate this kind of strength. Now, in a very different time and place, gevurah remains a challenging ideal. Can a Jewish state that exerts necessary koach, physical power and sovereign power, also embody gevurah, the moral strength expressed in compassionate care for the vulnerable? Can we Jews here in Israel and in America find the gevurah we need to avoid succumbing to our worst instincts? When we are distraught by the suffering inflicted on our own people, can we also open our eyes and hearts to the suffering of Palestinian civilians who did not choose this war? Our sages knew that Jews are human beings. We possess no special immunity that protects us from doing wrong. Like anyone else, we can give in to self-righteousness, anger, or a thirst for revenge, especially when we're deeply threatened. But the special strength that we call gevurah helps us resist those very human behaviors, reminding us that we can be better. We can walk in the ways of God. In the realm of one-to-one relationships, in the realm of Jewish community, gevurah is an especially precious kind of strength. It helps us overcome the behaviors that destroy relationships and summon up the qualities we need to remain in relationship: patience, kindness, intellectual humility, which admits that sometimes we can be wrong, the ability to listen, to see the good in one another, to accord respect, and to grant forgiveness. We can't always turn an enemy into a friend, but I do believe that within our Jewish community, we can work to see each other not as enemies, but as family and fellow travelers. Despite our differences, we hold this in common. All of us are human beings who are flawed and fallible. All of us are trying, in our own way, in this exceedingly difficult time, to figure out what is right. let us summon up gevurah, the heroic strength of caring, quiet persistence, and find our way together. The fourth and final sort of strength we need is perhaps the most important of all. At the end of this draining, dispiriting year, we must draw on the spirit of hope, tikvah, the belief that life can be better, if we work to make it so. Without tikvah, without inexhaustible wellsprings of hope, there could be no Jewish survival, no Jewish revival after the Shoah, here and in the state of Israel. And without it, there can be no Jewish future. So let us hold on to hope, hope for peace, distant as it may seem. Let us work for a better future for all the children of Abraham. On the cusp of this new year, I pray that we will cultivate all the strength we need to meet the myriad challenges of this historic moment. I pray that we'll have the koach to protect and defend life, the courage to stand firm against hatred and stand up for what is right, the gevurah to resist our dangerous impulses and rise to the moral level to which our sages call us, the tikvah that will sustain us going forward. Let us find strength in our shared texts and traditions, in our history and in our heritage. Most of all, let us find strength in one another. Jews know that the impossible is possible. A dying man entrusted Chaskel Theodore with a message. Tell them, he said, tell the story. Tell them that the shofar sounded in Auschwitz. A fragile, powerful cry rose up from the darkness, brought forth by the Ruach, the breath and spirit of undaunted Jewish courage. And a shofar sounded off the coast of Haifa, proclaiming the strong, hopeful spirit of a new beginning. Now the story and the sound belong to us. May they fortify us and bring strength to our hearts. I want to invite us all to rise. Tekiah. You may be seated.